Hello and welcome to the Teaching Together podcast, where we celebrate and share the glows and grows of teacher life. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Grace.
Each episode we like to share a glow or a grow from our classroom or things that have been happening for us in our teacher life. So Grace, do you have a glow to share with us?
I do. I have such an exciting if you're a teacher. Like, this is a very specific glow. It is to do with planning. Now, I was a paper planner person. I love it. Until very recently. And I actually can't remember what made me decide to find a digital planner. But I was looking for a digital planner. And I stumbled across this amazing free planner. And I'm actually a bit confused about what it's called, because the website title is Chalk, but I've seen in other places, like the apps that I download onto my phone for it is Planboard. Either way, if you Google Planboard or if you Google Chalk Planboard or Chalk Planner or whatever, you will get this amazing free planner. And I won't go into too much detail because this is just my glow. But the fact that it is free makes it so much better, because it's amazing. I love it. What I actually love about it is you can type in to each session. Everything's a different color. It looks beautiful. I can put in recess and stuff, non-teaching times. I can put in reminders. I can put in duties, all that sort of stuff. But what is really handy for me, and which is why I like it better than a paper planner, is I can attach the different files that I might need to print or I might need to refer to during a lesson. So good, which I couldn't do on my paper planner, obviously. And I just felt so disorganized because I kept having to remember what document went with what lesson. But now I can just attach it. And for example, when we do our literacy unit in the morning, almost always we're doing a worksheet. And so I just have my plan board open and to show the kids the worksheet, instead of holding up that the one single worksheet in front of them, in real life, which is quite small. I have it up on the board and it's just there in the lesson. And so I don't even have to have it open beforehand. I just literally click on it. It opens. It's fantastic. The text formatting options are quite varied. You can put things in different colors and there are different fonts. It's just it's awesome. And it's all for free. And so I've color coded. If something's a resource that I need to get ready to be orange, I highlight green the things that we actually got through, and then I highlight in yellow the things we didn't get through. And it's just awesome. It's so good. And I'm going to stop myself there because I could go on forever. And I love it so much. And if anyone from Chalk or Planboard is listening, I will totally be a rep for you. But it's so good. So if you're looking for a good free digital planner that does basically everything you could want it to, then Planboard is for you. It's a glow because it has actually made me feel so much more organized and less stressed because I know where everything is, because most of the things I do are on the computer. Anyway, I said I would stop myself. I will stop myself. Do you have a glow or a grow, Sierra?
I have, yes, a glow grow. It was this time last year during the HSC trials that I was, I sort of had this revelation that I really needed to teach writing better in my classes. And so this is definitely a work in progress for me, but I'm really glad we're doing this episode today because I've picked up a few little strategies over the last year that I've been working on implementing in my classes to improve my students' writing. One of my favorite things that I've tried that I can see has been helpful for my classes of all grades is just really taking the time to teach them expository terms, or, the identify, describe, explain, those kind of things that actually they might just interpret those as all the same thing, but they're actually asking for different levels of thinking. And so I've put a lot more emphasis on highlighting that and teaching them what those things mean. I actually found a fantastic resource from the Queensland Education Authority that has posters for every single one of those words and the actual thinking processes that are required to do that thing, if you're evaluating, and little sentence starters that students can incorporate into their writing that helps them make sure that they're doing that verb. So, that was a glow for me last week when I found those, because I was this is super helpful. But the other thing I've been doing is teaching my students how the word because, whenever I'm trying to show them how to explain, I'm what little word can you see in this word? And they say cause. And I'm like, when you use the word because, it helps you to show cause and effect. And just that little verbal visual strategy, like when I cover over the BE and they can see the word cause, like even for my youngest year 7s, they are starting to incorporate better cause and effect responses in their writing just by using that little strategy. So I guess that's a little bit of a glow for me because I felt really at a loss this time last year on how on earth do I teach high schoolers how to write better. And we're going to get all the way into that. But a grow because there's still lots more I want to do in this space. And I have to remind myself that I can't do everything at once.
I am personally very excited to get into all of the nitty-gritty stuff about writing. But before we do that, if you missed it, last episode we spent some time unpacking the latest PISA assessment results to discover that Australian students are actually pretty good at creative thinking comparatively. Go Australia! But there's no shying away from the fact that it's actually really challenging to teach creative thinking because it's really intangible and pretty ambiguous. So if you haven't already checked it out, we say this every time, but it's always true. Make sure you go back and have a listen to that episode because it shares some strategies and prompts for how we can go about approaching and integrating the skill of creative thinking into our day-to-day classes.
Today, we are tackling the challenge of teaching writing effectively in our classrooms. Research shows that writing performance in Australian schools has been a little bit stagnant for quite a few years now, and there's a noticeable decline as students transition to high school, which to me is not really surprising considering that as a secondary teacher, we kind of expect that when students have finished primary school, they know how to write. So we'll be taking some time today to consider what impact this is having on our students, as well as some strategies that teachers across all grades and subject areas can be trying out to strengthen their students' writing and help bring back the forgotten R, which isn't really even an R, but as Grace graciously taught me a few moments ago, it's still an digraph.
Yes.
WR is technically an R.
2 letters that make one sound.
But anyway, first it's time for tea.
What delectable concoction are you partaking in this evening?
I am just enjoying an English breakfast tonight. Slowly making my way through my tea stash, which has been lots of fun to discover what I had in my cupboard. But yes, English breakfast with a dash of milk, trying to drink it before it goes cold.
And I am yet again drinking French Earl Grey because it is my favourite tea at the moment. I just am absolutely obsessed with it. I have some that I take to school. And it's just the best. It's the best tea. And it's like listening to your favourite song on repeat until you get sick of it. I'll probably get sick to death of French Earl Grey and go back to Green Rose at some point. But right now it's French Earl Grey all the way.
So we want to jump into today's episode by having a look at the current state of writing in Australian schools. Now, it would be interesting to note that very aptly on the day that we're recording this episode, which we planned a while ago, that the National NAPLAN results have been released. And there's a lot of, I guess, disappointment and commentary in the media about a subpar performance by a large proportion of Australian students in relation to their reading and writing. I guess we want to acknowledge that there's so many different factors that impact NAPLAN results, and that it's worth mentioning too that, a transition to digital NAPLAN, a change in the way that NAPLAN is marked. We've moved away from bands to these standard descriptors. The fact that it's just a test on a day, and just a whole range of different things impact on how students perform in these assessments. And while the data gives us a snapshot and a picture of how our cohort is doing, we are mindful of the fact that there's just a bunch of different things that feed into those results. While we will be mentioning a little bit about NAPLAN data today, the whole picture is a lot more broad. So in 2018, which I've realised that is actually quite a few years ago now, NESA released a report called Teaching Writing, a report of the thematic review of writing data. And in the same year, there was a survey done called the Australian Writing Survey, which we'll refer to later, that sort of influenced a lot of the content of this report. And that report suggested that in New South Wales, writing performance has been relatively stagnant since 2011. I went back and had a look at some of the more recent NAPLAN data in like 2021, 2022, 2023, and it had actually improved a bit in years 3 and 5, but not really in years 7 and 9. Which is interesting because the NESA report mentions that there's actually been a decline in student performance as they move through the junior secondary years. This doesn't really surprise me at all because the increase of bring your own device policies and just more technology-based learning, which is valuable in its own right in other ways, I think has definitely led to a marked decline in the amount of writing that's happening in secondary classrooms. I graduated in 2016, which might make me sound like a baby, but pretty much even then, all of my classwork I was done was in booklets and exercise books.
Yeah, exactly the same. I only typed up my practice essays for English. Literally everything else. Like I remember my economics teacher, he would print out booklets of short answer questions. And we would we were always handwriting in those. Like BYOD was not a thing really. Well, I guess it kind of was, but only for year 11 and 12. Like we still had computer banks and everything.
Yeah. I had a computer at home to do my assignments. And I did have a laptop that I sometimes took to school, but it was definitely not what I was using to do all of my classwork on. And in my D&T classroom, I remember having like a small bank of computers, like maybe 6 or 7 that we used for working on our portfolios and stuff. But that was it. Like, I just feel like there's been a huge jump in the last like less than 10 years on how much we rely on computers to just engage in learning. Like it's not even just for teaching digital technologies. It's kind of for everything. To the point now where I almost feel like I avoid planning paper-based tasks and writing tasks in my classroom because I know there's like a 1% chance that any student in my class will have a piece of paper or a pen. A pen.
I hate that.
You know, I literally said to students today or yesterday, like I started talking to them because we were doing some practice exam questions. And like half of them walked into the classroom without a pen. I was like, we are at school. Like, just bring a pen.
It's like the smallest thing that you could get. You put it in your pocket.
They could
and you don't think it out.
They don't have to have a whole big chunky pencil case like we used to have to. But honestly, a pen.
Wow.
Anyway, I mean, I also failed to bring pens with me to class. But then that means that I don't have spares to lend to them anyway. And it just feels like it adds like 5 minutes to every lesson, trying to make sure that just everyone has a pen. And I know it's going to be a hassle and it's hard to engage them in. But I have reached a point where I am determined to just not avoid it because the reality is they still have to write and we still have to do exams. And really, they might know heaps of stuff. They might have learnt heaps. But if they don't learn how to articulate that well in a written form, it's going to have an impact and a negative impact on their academic performance because we rely on writing for them to communicate their knowledge a lot of the time. So sometimes I've been using whiteboards, like little mini whiteboards.
Love mini whiteboards in kindergarten too.
Like, so even for year 11 this week, I used some whiteboards just because I felt like I could engage them in a little bit of writing. I could have the resource that they needed there to be able to do the writing I was asking them for without it sort of being a big, oh, I don't have a book and I don't have this and I don't have that. So whiteboards have been a good option, especially for teaching some basic sentence activities, which we'll talk about a bit later. And I am starting to try and remember more that typing is still writing. You know, when I'm getting students to engage in writing in a digital way, it's still really important for them to be thinking through what they are typing. I read an interesting research summary today that, you know how often people will argue that, oh, you remember it more if you handwrite it. It was like a little experiment done in a uni class where everyone watched this TED talk and half of them were asked to take notes on their computer and half were asked to handwrite. Everyone remembered basic facts equally, but the students who wrote the handwritten notes were able to apply the information to a different sort of scenario better, and then they recalled it better the following week when they were tested on it. But the point the research made was that it was actually because when you're typing, you can almost just like type at the same speed that someone is speaking to you if you're a good typer. And so they were almost just kind of taking a transcript of the TED Talk.
Yeah.
Whereas the handwriters were listening out for the key ideas and
just
making notes of those, because they had to engage more with what the speaker was saying to be able to know what the key point was. And so that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
And especially if you are teaching in an older setting and getting kids to engage in note-taking, that can be a helpful thing to keep in mind. But I'm mindful of the fact that digital typed writing is still writing, and I'm trying to be more aware too of how I'm teaching sentences and punctuation and like good cause and effect writing, even for my students who are typing things out. But it's it can be really tough.
We struggle with this so much because it's obviously a fundamental skill across all subjects, and just being a human in our society now, or not now, basically for as long as writing has existed, which is a very long time, we rely on writing to communicate. And we need students to be able to communicate effectively during exams and especially during standardized tests like NAPLAN and the HSE. So it's really not something that can just be left to like early primary school or high school English teachers. Like it needs to be, it's a multidisciplinary skill. It's a cross-disciplinary skill. And we have some research, love some stats. In 2018, there was something called the Australian Writing Survey, which surveyed a total of 4,306 New South Wales teachers across the 3 sectors of schooling, which showed that teachers' confidence to teach a number of aspects relating to grammar diminishes as the stage of schooling progresses, which kind of makes sense because as you get further along in school, the demands of you become more complex and the standard of writing you're supposed to achieve also becomes more complex. And this survey also showed that there is a decline in the explicit teaching of writing from years 7 to 10. So once you get out of primary school, like Sarah was saying, you expect that they've been at school for like 6 or 7 years now. They should be able to write if their primary school teachers have done their job. So the explicit teaching of writing decreases, even though the complexity of the writing that's expected is increasing. So really, you would be expecting potentially an equal kind of curve on this imaginary graph that we're talking about, because it's getting more complex. And one major challenge that has been identified is that many teachers just don't feel adequately prepared to teach writing. Nearly half of the teachers surveyed in the Australian Writing Survey reported feeling underprepared by their initial teacher education program, or ITE, as you will hear us refer to it later, which is basically whether it was like a Masters of Teaching or an undergrad degree or whatever you did first to become a teacher, that's your ITE. And more than half of these teachers surveyed indicated that they were either not prepared or minimally prepared to teach the text structures of imaginative, persuasive, and informative texts. And that data is very chilling because of what we have said about how important writing is just in society, let alone in school.
I have literally no recollection of being taught anything to do with writing. The only thing I can recall in my undergrad was that literacy was a general capability.
Yes.
And I had to create opportunities for my students to do literacy, which sounds very vague because it is very vague.
Exactly.
And I even read something today about how literacy used to just be a very basic definition of like reading and writing, and that has really evolved to incorporate a much broader range of skills now. And so when we say, oh, general capabilities, we're incorporating, literacy and numeracy into all areas of the curriculum, there's actually very, very minimal advice or instruction on how you might do that or how you should do that in your subject area. And one thing that was really interesting that I noticed this week in reading some of the new technology syllabuses or syllabi.
I love syllabi. I don't even know if it's correct, but I choose syllabi.
Let's roll with syllabi. As I was reading the new tech mandatory and stage 5 syllabi, for my subject area, there were specific content statements in relation to different kinds of text types and types of writing that I should be having students do in my subject, which I actually thought was really helpful. And they also had quite a well put together document that NESA provided with the new syllabus to support me as a teacher in how I can teach writing in my context, which I was just thrilled about finding, because last year, when I was in this first pickle of realizing that I actually need to explicitly teach my teenagers how to write, it's not something that I can assume that they just can do well. And it wasn't really until I was looking at my Year 12 trial papers that it really dawned on me that just because they're almost finished school, it doesn't mean that I can just not talk about how to write well in the context of my subject.
And the HSC might be one of those opportunities where you're like, actually, let's explicitly focus on writing because you will be marked on the clarity of your expression.
Totally. But I think this is one of the shortfalls, is that during year 11 and 12, we kind of amp up the focus on writing again because we just keep talking about the HSC and you need to be able to articulate yourself clearly. And so that 7 to 10 period, students are actually missing out on a lot of important instruction that would actually prepare them better for the HSC if we were focusing on writing then.
So just all writing all the time is what I'm hearing, which I'm happy about because I love writing.
But it was when I was at a PD last year, around this time, just after the trials, we got to do this like speed dating thing as part of the PD session.
No.
Okay, it sounds really cringe and
awful. It's always cringe and awful.
But it was like speed dating with education consultants and specialists. You could ask the consultant any questions that you had in relation to their like area of expertise. And so we had like a primary literacy person come to our group, and we were all technology teachers, and she was like, oh, do you have any questions? And the other people were pretty quiet because we were like, you're a primary literacy consultant and we're design and technology teachers. And I was like, but yes, I do have a question, because how do I teach my kids how to write in my subject? And hell, because I don't know how to teach anyone how to write, because no one taught me how to teach them how to write. And I was actually just so excited to speak to her. And she was super helpful, but in the short few minutes that we had together, suggested to me a book called The Writing Revolution, which we've spoken about before. We've posted on our socials before. If you have totally no idea what it's about, you should definitely look it up. It's fantastic, and it basically just guides you through a way that you can integrate the explicit instruction of writing into any context, which I just found so helpful when I was like, I need to show my kids how to write better. Firstly, I have literally zero training in how to approach the teaching of writing. And 2, I don't want to just make them feel like I'm taking them back to kindergarten. So the big thing that the Writing Revolution pushes is about teaching writing in your context. And there's actually quite a bit of research to say that teaching writing is most effective when it's integrated rather than isolated from the rest of the curriculum, and can actually be used as a tool to promote the content that you're learning rather than I'm teaching you about writing.
Because just teaching writing is so boring. And I say this as someone who loves writing. And like most good skills, if you are learning it in context, you're going to remember it better. You immediately are applying it and you can understand, oh, actually, no, I see why I need to learn this skill. Even if you still don't enjoy it, it's good to know there's a reason for this. Like, we're not just teaching you isolated stuff. And you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone as well. You can address some content, get some of those syllabus stop points out of the way, do the writing. Like, totally agree.
I think it's so helpful because one of the biggest things that teachers always talk about is like not having enough time. And feeling like we've got, so much that we've got to fit into a certain number of lessons. And I literally said last week that I just need a few like clones of myself to be able to get through all the things that I've got to do. And it's not even something I can easily delegate or, have someone else help me with, because, it's my thing and it's my brain. And there's just so many things we've got to get through and just not enough copies of myself to get it done. And so just adding the thought of having to learn how to explicitly teach writing and then somehow find a way to add that into my lessons, which I already feel like are just impossible to get through. Everything I've got to get through was just quite stressful. And so I can so understand why the default for secondary teachers especially, but primary teachers, I guess in any other context where they're not doing writing, just let it kind of default to being the English teacher's problem.
Yeah. And even in kindergarten, like I'm looking at my weekly like delegation of lessons and periods and subjects and whatnot. And I'm often like, oh, I've forgotten to put writing in. Like I should really do that. And I'm a kindergarten teacher. Like I should really be considering this. Like, and I'm not considering it as much as I should. This is a crowded curriculum. There's so much stuff I want to be doing. And then I get to Thursday and I'm like, I haven't done half the stuff that I wanted to get done this week because we get carried away and I get too excited about whatever and it's not writing. Even though I love writing.
And if you can't get excited about writing, who's going to get excited about writing?
Nobody.
Well, I think what I've found really valuable is just flipping this idea and actually approaching or using writing as an instructional strategy, which is one of the big themes and takeaways, both from the NESA report, but also from the Writing Revolution, which have both mentioned that when you use writing and it's well integrated into the context and content that you're teaching, it's actually a really effective instructional strategy. And so when you flip that idea on its head of being like, I don't have time to teach writing, well, no, you probably don't have time to teach writing as its own separate thing. And why would you? Because it's boring. But when we teach students content through writing activities, we're strengthening both their writing and their subject knowledge. So looking at using writing as a tool to learn and not just as an assessment tool is a really, really valuable way of approaching it and something that I've found really helpful, especially with my older students, when it just feels like time is of the essence and we have so much to get through.
As someone who is passionate about writing and has taught writing as an SLSO and on placement and that kind of thing, even in kindergarten, I mean, it's probably easier to teach writing in kindergarten because it's not something that's expected of them to already know. So I don't feel like I'm babying them to say, remember the 3 things in a sentence. We need a capital letter, we need finger spaces, and we need a full stop. But honestly, some high school kids could really use the reminder that those 3 things exist. Like seriously. I don't know if I've already mentioned this on the podcast, but I did a THRAS training course, which was awesome. One of the exercises we did was to write our name with our non-dominant hand. Just using, the alphabet. But then we had to write our name using our non-dominant hand in the phonetic alphabet, which is a bunch of symbols and stuff. And that was just a really interesting exercise because it showed me what writing is like for students who are probably in kindergarten or any stage really who don't have a mastery of the fine motor skill of writing and they're not all over their alphabet and they don't just automatically know how something is spelled. And it just really gave me an insight into how difficult writing can be.
Yeah, there's a whole range of different things that we can, I guess, observe in our students' writing. And NESA has suggested some really effective strategies for how we might approach different problems that we see in our students' writing. And I have realized that several of them are the same activities and strategies that are found in the Writing Revolution book. So NESA has drawn on some of the research that the writers of that revolution have come up with, as well as some research from other places. For the first problem, it sort of said when you have kids who just don't know where to start with their writing, one thing that you can do is some imitation. So looking at examples of quality texts. I guess in a kindergarten classroom, that might literally look like, let's look at one sentence.
Exactly. And I think that even writing can have a formula, like the peel or petal or steel paragraph. Being able to have an acronym that is this structure. Every time you approach this type of text, this is the formula that you need to follow. That can become the quality text that you're imitating. And of course, when you first introduce this, you would have an example. Like I remember going through that kind of stuff when we were learning how to write persuasive text in primary school. And it would have like the text down the middle, and then in the side margins, it would have like annotations, just kind of saying, hey, this actually is not just a big blob of words. Like each sentence has a purpose. And in high school, I think it might have even been during my HSC, we color-coded, probably in English, we color-coded some paragraphs based on their purpose. So like the introduction, the example, and the evidence from the text or whatever, and then the linking sentence. And when it was put in colors like that, it made me realize that it's only like 2 or 3 sentences per thingo. That's a very technical term. But when you put it all together, it creates a very robust paragraph. And that personally for me took the load off, because I could go, I just need to tick these couple of boxes, and then I have a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts.
I love that you said every sentence has a purpose. One thing that I'm really trying to drill into my kids is quality over quantity of writing. Like,
amen.
I'm talking to year 7 about it, but I'm talking to year 11 about it. Like even recently I've been marking some exams where I have, only been able to give 1 out of 4 for a response that actually used more than the allocated space, but the writing was kind of saying nothing. It was just lots and lots of words. So yeah, quality and helping students to understand what a quality text is and what to actually be looking for. And that every sentence has a purpose. I just really like that you said that. Don't just put sentences in your response for the sake of having more words there.
Yes, it doesn't matter really what your word count is. Like, oh, you wrote so much, you must be so smart. That does not apply. You need to actually be answer the question.
Yes. I do love the color coding thing too. I mean, yeah, I'm going a little bit of a tangent here, but with my year 7s last term, in their design portfolio, I was asking them to document the changes that they made for each of their prototypes that they were doing for their little race cars they were building. And on the marking rubric, to get sort of full marks for that section, they had to describe the change and the force. So we were linking to like gravity and friction and stuff, the force that like they were trying to sort of utilize, and the impact it had on the car. That's kind of like a lot of components that they had to think about. And often they'll just write, oh, I will add wheels, or like something really basic. And it's like, okay, you've described a little bit about, or you've stated the change that you've made to your prototype, but you haven't really told me why you've made that or what effect that's going to have. And so we did color code. I was like, the change, put in red, your linking words, put in green. So like the because, the force, we made purple, and the impact, we made orange, or whatever the colors were. And I was so excited when I actually went through and marked those that most of them wrote beautifully because they had all the components and they just wrote the one sentence, but it was one complex sentence that addressed all of those required components. And so by imitating that and really breaking that down and showing them, here's what a good sentence in response to this looked like, actually had a huge impact, which is great.
Yeah, because most kids just are like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe I can hide behind lots of words, but that's not going to help. Like, yeah. And I have found in my experience that when you give students a formula, they can go, oh, this task of writing that might seem a little bit ambiguous at first actually is really tangible and achievable.
Love it. Another issue that might come up is that your kids just don't know how to plan their writing. One of the big points that the book, The Writing Revolution, makes is that you can't write without a plan for what you're going to write.
Amen.
And so this is a big thing, again, with my senior students when I'm trying to get them to write responses. Let's unpack the question and let's actually dot point a couple of ideas first before we just start verbal dumping on the page, because often they actually don't get to the good point until sort of halfway through what they've written. And then again, they see that visual like, oh, I've written enough, so I'm done. But they haven't actually planned. And so they've just waffled for the first 6 lines or
Yeah,
something?
if you can't do the Michael Scott of I start a sentence and hope I find the end along the way. Like, that is not what this is.
I love that so much.
This is not that.
That needs to be a meme in the classroom, like wall or something.
Yes,
My goodness.
in every high school English teacher's room. Yes, like if you're going to be succinct and concise and to the point, you can't waffle. Like, you need to know what you're going to say so that you can say it in as few words as possible.
Do you get your little children to plan anything before they write, and how would you do that?
I think our planning is more like, what are we actually going to write? So sometimes we are always working on a word, phrase, sentence level, nothing beyond a sentence really, because at this point they don't even really realize that sentences can go beyond one line. And I will ask them, what are the 3 things we need to remember in a sentence? Capital letter, finger spaces, full stop, or a question mark now we can do. And they will happily tell me those things. So I will remind them of that before we start. And then it's usually we're writing a sentence in response to a text we've read or something along those lines. There's a stimulus involved. And so I will say, okay, we're writing a sentence about a cat, for example, because it's always the cat sat on the mat. But if we're going to write a sentence of the cat sat on the mat, I would have to say, okay, what is our cat going to do? Where is our cat going to do it? Like, kind of just giving them prompting questions. Then we would probably construct that on the board together. And then depending on how patient I'm feeling, I would either get them to do, we'd all write one word together at a time, or they could just copy it down once we've all written it together, because we're at that stage where now some of us are great at writing and very confident and some of us are not. So we're all at different levels and it's very confusing. But that's kind of how I would plan in kindergarten. Like, it's more like a class discussion and just a reminder of what are the 3 things we need to remember when we write a sentence.
Yeah. No, I like that you said, like, what is the cat going to do? Where is the cat going to sit? One of the other strategies that is recommended for if you're noticing that your student's writing is quite basic, like, I guess for a kindergarten level, their writing might literally just be a fragment of a sentence which says cat sat.
Yes, and if some of my kids can write that, I'm cheering.
Or something like that. But I guess anything beyond kindergarten where you're actually expecting that students can construct a sentence, if you're noticing that their writing is really basic, there's 2 strategies you can use to sort of help them expand and elaborate on their ideas. And one is literally having them answer who, what, when, where, why, how. And it might be at a sort of lower primary level, you might just be asking them like, what, when, who. But for a more secondary level, you're adding like why and how. And when you have them actually answer those kind of words and then reconstruct those details into a new complex combined sentence, it's a great strategy for how you can get them to elaborate on their ideas. The other tool or activity you can use is called Because But So, and I literally used this yesterday. It's a strategy recommended from the Writing Revolution where you are trying to get them, to add more detail to their sentences. But I also find it really helpful to get students to move out of that just describing sort of level of thinking and into that more explaining and analysing. And I mean, because but and so are still pretty simple words.
Yeah.
But we were looking at a sample exam question and I gave them a sentence starter for that question, and they had to finish it off with because, and then the same sentence starter and but, and then the same sentence starter and so. So like you might say, my example was, safety impacts the success of this design because safety impacts the success of this design, and safety impacts the success of this design so. And it seems really basic, but it is just teaching them how to use those kind of like conjunctions to just expand their ideas a little bit and just go beyond I'm identifying this or I'm just like stating a fact.
Yes, and that's one of the harder things to kind of look at a student's writing and go, I just need more. And they're like, more words? I can give you more words.
Yes. And it gives a really clear direction on, no, I don't want more words. No,
less words
to give me more depth. But it's really hard to, give them a tangible thing to practice that helps them to show depth And that is just a really simple tool. You can use any sentence starter you want, because, but, so. It's a great way for you to integrate content that you're teaching. So you might have, you might be talking even in maths, and it's like a square is a 2D shape because, or a square is a 2D shape, but, and then so.
A square is a 2D object, so it only has 2 dimensions. It's a 2D shape, so it's a 2D shape. That was very unhelpful. I apologize.
Anyway, you get the gist.
I do.
So you can use it as you could use it as a quick exit ticket or a quick entry ticket or some kind of strategy to help rehash some content that you're actually doing in class. And in doing so, some writing.
And if you want to make this a little bit fancier, you could replace so with therefore.
You could, yes.
Which is a great way to teach better vocabulary as well.
Totally. I love
it. And
it just doesn't ring as nicely.
It doesn't. Because, but, therefore, no. Because, but, so. 100%.
But I do like the therefore.
The therefore, because that's what the so is.
You can start adding more complex ones too, like although.
However. Who knows how to use however? Nobody knows how to use however. I don't even know, and I think I know everything. Which is not true. I don't know everything. Anyway, couple more really quick ideas. So one other issue that you might find is that your students are writing a lot, but their writing is quite confusing. So one strategy that you can use with this is to actually provide your students with scrambled sentences. Again, make them content specific, whatever content you're teaching in your class at the moment. At the end of the lesson, give them a worksheet with 5 or 6 sentences that relate to what you've been teaching them that lesson. And they will then have to draw on the knowledge that they've learnt about some particular historical event or some geographical feature. Anyway, using content that you've taught in class, give them some scrambled sentences in relation to that. They will have to draw on the knowledge that they've learnt to unscramble them. So that's, helping consolidate what they've learnt, but also help them actually think about, well, what makes a coherent sentence? And what I like about this activity, which was specified in the NESA document itself, is that this is really easy to differentiate. So if you want to really challenge students, you have 0 punctuation, which means they really have to rely on their subject knowledge and their idea of what is a coherent sentence. But if you're having students will struggle, you can give them hints for where the start and the end of the sentence will be, because you can have your capital letter and your full stop or whatever punctuation you want. It's just a really flexible activity, which I really love. It's something you could use literally from kindergarten to year 12.
Totally. And use your friend ChatGPT to scramble your sentences for you.
Yes. Why would you ever consider doing anything on your own ever again? Because ChatGPT is there for you.
Another problem that you might notice is students just lacking relevant vocabulary in their writing, particularly from a subject-specific point of view. There might be really specific vocab that you want your students to use. So just good old anchor charts and word banks.
I love those.
To help kids integrate the words that you are wanting them to use into their writing. Make it available to them and give them opportunities to practice using those words in their sentences.
Just like you would expect them to be practicing their times tables so they can do all the other parts of maths, you need to be expecting them to, and providing opportunities for them to, practice editing and constructing sentences and identifying all their parts, because it's a skill that they need to keep practicing, just like any other. It's just a little bit more time consuming potentially, which is why I think we kind of shy away from it and think, oh, it's a bit much. But if you tackle it a little bit at a time, or if you have the capacity to implement some kind of daily routine in whatever your educational context looks like, you can kind of chip away at it. And it's not then the job of either kindergarten or year 11 and 12 teachers to attack this mountain of writing anguish.
Yeah. So big takeaways are: integrate writing into your content. It's going to benefit your students' writing, and it's going to benefit their learning of the content.
So we have come to the end of our writing episode. We enjoyed this. I really actually enjoyed talking about writing. I could literally talk about writing forever, so we hope you enjoyed it too. As always, if you are listening on a platform that enables written reviews, please review us. We do love that. We would love to read a review. We want to have a listener mail segment, guys. We want to have a listener mail, which means you need to write us stuff. So find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube podcasts, which until recently I didn't know was a thing, but there you go. If you want to give us 5 stars, I say this often, but it is true. We would love you forever. And I've come to the end of my wrap up, so we shall say, bye.